Hello everyone, welcome to eLearnChat, where it is all about learning. My name is Rick Zanotti, and I'm joined today by Harold Muliati. He is co-hosting today, and he's also doing our video production. Well, our guest today is Dr. Susan Friedman. She's been on before, she's a close friend, and we're going to be talking about context today. And before we go there, we also want to announce that we have a new podcast coming up probably as soon as next week, and it'll be called Sounding Great. And it's all about you, your voice, your presentations, your audio, because you should sound great. Keep your eyes out for it. We'll be notifying you soon. Okay.
Here we go.
This show is sponsored by Relate Corporation. Visit us at www.relatecasts.net. Thanks.
And we are back, and in our center position of power again, it is Susan Friedman. How are you, Susan?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
Good. We're glad you could join us again. And just to put this meeting in a little bit of context, you're going to be talking about context.
Yes.
Yes. Anyway, it's funny
because narrow that down just a little bit.
A little bit. Yeah. But context is always one of those things that people go, what do you mean context? What's not in context? What do you mean by context? And then you have the other people who argue, well, isn't content context? No. It's different. Sort of. Where should we start, Susan?
Well, I was thinking about starting with the aspect of how do you even access content a lot of times, because quite often a project will start off with, somebody in the organization in higher levels, and they'll be talking about, a performance problem or some need. They will identify some need. So you're asked to come in and help them with some kind of training solution once they've identified a training, that it's actually knowledge and skills and a training solution that you want to go ahead and address. And then the aspect of the learner perspective is really important when you're talking about that. So I think what's interesting is that you always toggle between the corporate point of view and the learner point of view. And as a designer, you're going back and I find myself anyway, back and forth. So one of the aspects in that back and forth that I do is I think about a lot of times we as designers think about content, how can learners access content? But the learning solution is prepared and they have to access the solution itself, right? I mean, they have to be able to get to the program and access the content. Once they get to the content, then they can, then it's a matter of, relevance and real world scenarios and all the things you have to do as designers to engage them and help them actually learn. But they have to get there first. So that's what I thought we'd talk about today.
Well, and the other day we were talking about this is not on air. We were talking about access, and when people hear access in this context, they often think of a few different things. They might think of accessibility in terms of, for example, someone with a visual disability or something like that, being able to get to the content, or they might think of access in terms of like, what is the LMS you're using and how do you actually on the online connect to the content. And as I understand, what you're talking about incorporates a little bit about that, but you have a little bit of a different approach to when you're referring to access.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the access is, for my mind, and I do this when I do learner analysis on my projects and in my work. So I've come up with five different things that you should really think about and talk about with the SMEs and the stakeholders when you're starting a project that go a little bit beyond the ADA requirements. Those aspects are important, of course, but these are additional things that might easily be overlooked if you're not careful. So I have certain questions that I've prepared that will address these 5 things. So I thought I would go ahead and show those.
Sure.
Okay, so one of the things is, looking at like the source of how learning can be received, right? So one of the questions I like to ask is, in which different ways would a learner gain knowledge about the content? And by asking this question, I think it's interesting because what you may hear is getting at what they're used to doing. And that will help you, I think, guide you a little bit in terms of modality. So you can see, are they used to just talking to other people, like interacting personally, like calling a friend, getting a buddy involved, or maybe a little group chat or something like that? Or are they used to some kind of formal resource, like maybe they just go search, LinkedIn Learning, or maybe they go search something formal. So that can help you know the nuances of what the learners are used to. And I think that will help you really explore different modalities and help that relatability, because they're already comfortable with certain things. So if you can align with those certain things that they already are used to, that could really help, especially with buy-in.
Now that brings up a question, and I think we briefly talked about it pre-show. And that's kind of when you brought that up, I was thinking of change management. When let's say you, as an instructional designer or analyst or somebody at one level, may know something that the SME may not even know. For example, somebody on top in a company might say, you know what, we need to do some change management. We need to not only learn what they're doing, but change what they're doing. We want to make it different. Right. We know how we used to do it. We want to find better ways to do it. So you as a designer, all of a sudden now we're in the position of you've got to be trusted by the person you're talking with, but you also have to change, or at least guide them towards changing a lot of what they are doing, maybe for others. So you've got to find out the current process and then maybe look at the ways to make that process more effective. How does that play into your needs analysis?
Yeah, so sometimes if you are able to find out what they're used to, like formal or informal learning practices, whatever they're used to, then that allows you to make recommendations that can align, but you can describe the advantages of a certain approach that might be similar to what they're doing, but maybe just shifting a little bit. Mm-hmm. So if people get the fact that they are probably 50% or 75% already there, right? Then moving them over just a little bit more won't be too bad. Right. But if you come out with some radical thing, that where people say, no, people are just used to talking to each other. We don't have that kind of formality. You go straight to formality, that might not work so well. You might get this instant, I don't want to do this.
Yeah, they just reject you. Yep.
Exactly. So, but if you say, okay, I know you guys are used to doing this, right? Maybe they're used to the face-to-face, but because we have this situation now that might be new, we can simulate that certain experience with this other approach. So even though you're used to a more maybe physical personal connection, right? Like going to somebody else's cube or something like that, I found some software that you might be able to use that kind of creates that same interaction that you're used to and you're comfortable with. But because we have this new thing in an organization, we have to do it this way. That personal way is not maybe so comfortable anymore, or so not comfortable, but available anymore. Right. So now we're asking you to shift a little bit to do it this way instead.
Okay. And
so that's how I might approach that.
Okay, that's good. And let's go on to the second point.
Yeah. So, well, another aspect, just real quick on that point, is that people might not have access to computers, for instance, right? There might be some situations where people are working on like a physical context job where maybe they don't have access, maybe they're out, like say they're chefs, or say that they're on a production line or out in the field somewhere. You have to figure out, how they would be able to access training and learning solutions as well. So thinking about that limitation could be the same, very similar. Yeah, so another aspect I was thinking about is that of time, because also, some people just don't have a lot of time, right? So the question I might ask is, how much time would a learner be expected to spend on formal training, informal training, and on job practice assignments? So that would give an indicator of how they go to, approach learning, how they go to experience learning, right? Do they, are they used to just having like a mentoring situation, or are they used to going to the LMS and doing a search, or are they used to some kind of, practical, apprentice type situation? So there might be different ways. And so based on how they answer that question, you might be guided as a designer to, integrate. Maybe somebody doesn't have the time. Maybe you can think of a way, or just know as you're designing the content, as you're developing this, not developing, but as you're creating the structure for the content, maybe you want to integrate the learning into their existing work somehow, right? Because they may not have time to sit, or go to an offsite location, or sit in a room, or take an hour. Maybe you have to get to them in the context of what they do. And you also might have a situation where they're not given permission. Maybe they need some permission to leave the floor or to leave their workplace situation and go do training, right? So even if you say, oh, I have to have it in this location, you might have to work with managers and leaders to get permission for employees to leave. And to go do the training.
One of the problems when you talk about time, a lot of companies, especially large ones, they have a lot of training people have to take every year. And we're talking, I've seen some 25, 30, 40 hours of training. And of course, everybody waits to the very last minute. So at the last, the week before it's due, all of a sudden the computers are all bogged down as everybody's trying to take their training. Yeah, well, we have 20,000 employees all taking the training at once. Good. But that's also an issue too when you're talking about not only the users' time, but the department's time. A lot of people, let's say for example, customer service or production, like you mentioned earlier, they don't want to take people off the production lines or the customer service phones because they lose a lot of money and time when they're not on those phones. So every moment of training detracts from a moment of doing something else that they consider more productive. That's a tough one. Yeah.
Very true. Yeah, and that does lead me to another point. That again about permission. That might hit a budget issue as well, right? So there might be a budget limitation to having people leave. And one of the questions I ask is, what type of costs are tracked for the business when a learner goes through training? Because, sometimes learners, you have to have the kind of the count. When we go ahead and we design something and we release it, you have to know that people actually took it. So we're looking for kind of a head count or some consumption number. And that, people aren't allowed to break away, if they aren't allowed to break away because the person doesn't, the department or entity doesn't have the budget to release the employee, maybe the entity or the department has to pay the higher organization for that training, right? There might be some interdepartmental cost.
Funny money. Yep.
Exchanging. Yeah. So that aspect, that aspect is something to be considered.
No, and when you bring that up, a lot of companies, they go, "Yep, we're all into the training." They rarely, not all, some really do budget it out, but a lot of them kind of get hit blindsided by, wait a minute, we've got 4,000 people on the phones, and they're going to be out for 30 minutes for this one class. 30 minutes times 4,000 times that's a lot of money. They look at their salaries, they look at the cost,
Yeah.
they look at downtime. All of a sudden they go, wait a minute, that's millions of dollars of training time. Now,
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, that scares
But
people.
I think absolutely. And in that situation, I think you just have to talk with leaders really early on about what the benefit might be to, like efficiency, cost savings. There's a lot of different things that might be beneficial to them that might make it worth releasing their people to the training. But they also might have to pay for it. I've been made aware of situations where one entity will have to, one part of the organization, like a department, will have to actually allocate money back to the training organization to be able to send their people, right?
Sure.
Like it has to come out of budget. So I was thinking about that in the budget. And do they have the budget? Do they have enough of a budget to send enough people over, to address the things that the training was designed to address in the first place?
Yeah. And then, it's funny you bring that up because that leads to another step, which I'm not sure if you're talking about in this one, probably for another time. And that would be, how do you measure the training and whether anybody's improved in productivity? That's a talk for another time.
Yes, that is a talk for another time. But it also depends on that's a big content area as well.
Yeah.
That's where you really get into the content and the design and the strategy behind the design and the impact and all that.
Yep.
And yes, that's a whole different area, a great area, but a whole different one.
Yeah.
But so of course, people often think about bandwidth, right? A lot of times that, people say they want to do training and they're willing to do it, but they can't, somehow they have some kind of technical problem, right? As we're all familiar with. You have willing and ready participants, but, there's like bandwidth or technical issues. So one of the questions I'll ask about that is, could portions of this topic be relevant to a global audience, or will they be only offered within the U.S.? So a lot of times when you ask that question, what you're listening for is things that will indicate that things are not standard, right? If there are variances in technical like ability or robustness in how people can access, the internet or the computers that they use or things of that nature, then you have to know that, and you have to start to think about those nuances as you design, right?
Yeah, and when you get into that, and if you're talking like a global company, you're also dealing with different laws. Which can affect HR or anything else, or talent management, whatever you want to call it. And that's another thing. So global becomes a whole other headache in a lot of ways, because there's even more things to consider.
Yeah, so that's something that I know. For instance, I worked on a project with India, and places are just different in terms of what they have available, and it's maybe not good or bad. It's just different. So you just have to know what that is. And I think stating expectations for learner access is important. So right when they get there, they should know, like I've seen this, right? We've all seen this in programs. Your computer must be, this fast, or you must have, a certain bandwidth to be able to access this, right? So people know right away that they need to prepare the technology that they're using to be able to access, the learning. So, so that is another aspect. And then, The last one I thought about was disclosure of proprietary information, right? So thinking about whether or not, especially if it goes inside or outside the company, thinking about whether or not, I guess making sure that people who should access certain information will, and those who should not access certain information will not. So the question I'll ask on that respect is, will this information be offered to employees only, or are there potential areas that might be relevant to external partners or other audiences? So when you ask that question, what you're listening for is, different audiences and what they might be privy to and what they might not be privy to, and what is the relationship really with the company. Sometimes they have agreements that are signed that says, yes, you can get this information even though you're outside. Sometimes they have, very strict requirements that says this is internal only and you cannot give this to anybody who's external. So maybe you have a mix of the two, and that's something you have to be really careful about. So the solution I thought of is resolve how restricted content will be inaccessible to intended audiences and accessible to those who need it the most. So you may have to start really splicing your content up, and then how do you deliver that? What platform do you deliver that on? How do you manage that, kind of you get this, but you don't get that situation? So, yeah, so those are just a few things, where when you're doing the learner analysis and, it's just one aspect to explore, and how you're going to really look at, so many things to look at in the initial analysis, right? But this is one aspect that even if you got the budget you wanted and you had access to all kinds of different modalities, right? You could do e-learning, or you could do facilitator-led, instructor-led, or you could do all these different things. Even if you design those things really well, they may not make it to the learner because of some of these issues. You won't even stand a fighting chance because you did a great thing that might provide the outcome that everybody's looking for, but they can't even get there. They can't even get to what they need. So yes, this goes definitely beyond ADA. And ADA is, once they get there, then how do they interact with the content, right? But this is where you can't even get there.
And going back again to what we were talking about the other day, how do you approach in your analysis figuring out actually what the specific learners need to know? Because sometimes it depends on who the actual audience is for the course. There may be certain parts that would be relevant to teach to some people, but other people won't even need to deal with those parts, so you don't necessarily need to include that. How do you approach figuring that out?
I like to ask about the problem. And I like to say, what are you observing that's making you ask, or feel like there's a need? What is it that it might not be something that people are actually doing, right? It might be data that they're looking at, and the data is indicating some certain thing not happening well enough. So then you have to just drill down. So I always prepare for these meetings, much like I did for this program, but I always prepare and I write everything out, because I personally think things through by writing. That's just my processing. But when I have my list of questions, they're simply, I'll ask the question, and I might let people know I'm answering or asking a specific written question, or I might not. I might just say, hey, I just want to talk to you about something, and let's just have a little chat about this. And I'll ask my question, but it won't seem so formal, right? So you have to know the follow-up questions to ask. You've got to drill down, right? So if you start by saying, how do you know, or what is it that indicates that there's an issue that needs to be addressed, you have to listen to what they say, take that and start drilling down into, basically the whys, right? What are people doing? How is it being impacted? How is the business being impacted by these certain behaviors, that you've identified? And what is, make sure definitely you have to know your outcomes. What would success look like is another fun question. How do you see success, like successful performance, if it's that, or what would indicate that things are going really well? What would tell you that things are going really well? What would you read in this report? What would you see people doing? What would that look like? Just describe what that would look like to you. And that a lot of times, will let you know, will start guiding you into the direction you need to take to be able to get at really what the issue is that they're trying to really get at.
Right.
Yeah. Does that help? Does that answer it?
Yeah.
Yep. And with that, we are out of time. Half hour
Not
goes
a time.
fast.
That was so quick.
Half hour goes fast.
Sure does.
But we'd love to have you back on again. And this is leading to a whole mess of other topics that we can talk about that
Really
are kind of key that I think a lot of people just don't really consider until they get in that situation, and then by then it's too late. So
Yeah.
So this
It's a fun area.
Yeah, well, you've worked at some large global companies, so what looks like a simple course may affect a whole lot of other people.
Yeah, I think the best courses are the ones that look really simple, but they take a lot of work to get there.
Yeah.
That's important.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. We always appreciate having you on, and we look forward to seeing you again another time. And I guess nobody was in chat room today. I think we were running a little late.
We had off time.
So probably nobody popped in today, but that's not abnormal. And if you're watching the show, please give us a thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube, or subscribe, and then you'll be notified when we're on again every week. So we will see you folks next week on the next eLearn Chat. Have a good one, everyone. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.